All right, g'day. So let's see what we've got planned for this first lesson in the course. I'll just go over the three topics with the students and then talk about what we're going to do in this topic, how we break down the definition of psychology, and we get into today we're looking at behavior and mental processes. So the real key for this lesson would just general introduction to studying psychology, what the definition is, the scientific study of individual human behavior and mental processes, and we're going to break into that last part, behavior and mental processes. And this question here, why do we study both, is just to get students to think about those two aspects of psychology. In the workbook, you'll find a page that just has psychology written in the middle. It's like brain dump or brainstorm, and you give them the piece of paper, you give them the workbooks, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and they just write down everything that comes to mind when they think of psychology. Excuse me. Remind them it's not a test. We don't expect them to know anything about psychology at this stage. It's just the purpose of this is just to get them thinking about psychology, to see what they already know or ideas they have. And if they're being honest, most of them will write down mind reading on that page. But what it really does as well is it helps to teach schema theory. So after they've written down, after 2 or 3 minutes, collect all their papers and give them their textbook or whatever other resources you want to give them, and then keep it on file. So put their names on, keep it on file, and leave it until you teach schema theory. And when you teach schema theory, bring back those pieces of paper and give it back to the students. And now in a different colored pen, they'll write out after 2 months, 6 months, 12 months, however long it's been since they've studied the course. When you teach schema, they now write down everything they think about psychology, and they'll see how much they've learned and how their schema for psychology has changed. And that's a really concrete way of teaching the concept of schema. Right. So then they can do some reading. I like to get them to read the introduction at the same time, and then I have something for them to collect, or I have some indication that I know when they've finished reading that introduction, so I get a general sense of their reading speed. Then they move on to their key terms, traffic lights. This is in the workbook, and so they've got the color code here. They just fill in this one column, right? So psychology, if they know what the word means, they color it green. If they're not sure, yellow. If they've no idea, so cognition would be a red for most students. And this is a good pre-post assessment. So at the end of the unit, you come back and students fill in this column here, and then they can see what how much they've learned. After this finishes, so if they do finish early, they can read the preface in the book on page 5. And when everyone's finished, or after a certain amount of time, you can get students to stand up, move around the room, and they find someone who has a green where they are a yellow or a red. In other words, they get someone to explain a word to them that the other person knows, but they might not know. And that's just a good way to get a bit of movement and activity in the class. Anytime you see these colored chalkboards, this is a chalk and talk, right? So this is right. The slides are here for you to stand and explain something. And by the way, these PowerPoints are fully editable, so you can add to them, change them, add images, do whatever you like. So I just explained the definition, and today we're looking at these things. What is a behavior and what is a mental process? And I don't want to give too many examples just yet. But I'm just saying that they're observable actions, things that we can see, and without naming specific names, because same thing with cognition. I give the definition, right, and generally explain what it is. I don't want to give too many examples because they're going to complete this table in their workbooks, so I don't want them just to parrot back what I've said. And so they write down any observable actions that they know, that they've seen people do, or things they think psychologists might study. Same thing with mental processes. And if there's any that might be somewhere in the middle, like emotions or love, is that a behavior? Is that cognitive process? So that could be a bit tricky. Yeah. And then I'll explain 3 reasons why psychologists study both. And one is because cognition is central to the human experience. It's what separates us from most animals, our advanced thinking capabilities. Both of these are inextricably linked. The fact that we often think before we act, and if we don't think before we act, then why don't we think? So we can't really separate the two. And if we're thinking about as humans, as individuals, how we think is just as important as how we act. So those two things are of equal importance, which is similar to the first point there. So that's why. Now I just give them a little test, how well did you listen? And then this is the question in their workbook, and they simply write down what they remember about what I just explained. They can also, with all of these guiding questions, they can read the textbook if they didn't quite get it. And I would always recommend that they read the lesson for in the textbook for every lesson, either if it's out of class, after class, during class, whenever, but they should read every lesson. Sorry, and anyone that finishes early can you can direct them to this video. It's a crash course, Introduction to Psychology. I don't show it in the class because it's basically 100 years of psychology in 10 minutes, and I think it's really overwhelming with content, and the guy speaks even faster than I do, so I do find it a bit overwhelming, but it can be there for you know, extended students who might be interested, and they might already know the crash course series and want to watch it. So then I just post up this here as a review. Do we know these things? Go over them. That was the aim of the lesson, and then we get into the next lesson. We'll be looking at individual behavior. So that's a nice, easy introduction to psychology.